that again come up rich as nitrogen sacs. I mean, that's dead substance on a soil. We also know that nitrogen-rich fertilizers really do interfere with the soil bacteria. They basically, the soil microbes are bypassed. The vine just feeds direct from the sac like a drip feed, and these bacteria, they become redundant and then they die off basically. And if they die off, your whole food chain, your whole food web, the soil food web, starts falling apart basically. So you have less nutrient retention, so you need to put more fertilizer on. That's the situation why I find many wine growers are converting to organic, and now they say, listen, our yields are dropping, we're putting more and more of this dead stuff on our vines, like we've been told to do, but our yields are dropping. Well, the yields are dropping, guys, because you've lost the humus. You've burnt it all out of your soil. The humus is what makes the soil soil, and it's the earthy bit of the soil. And you've burnt that away because you're putting on these salts onto the vineyard. Your vines are becoming more thirsty. You need more irrigation. So you need more irrigation, which is an external input. You need more fertilizer, which is an external input. And your quality and your yield goes down. So again, make the virtuous circle. Get the fertilizer on there in a living form from the living animals who've shat out the cover crops that they've eaten and turned it into living compost. You stick your hand in it, you can smell it's alive, you can see it's alive, you have worms, etc. coming in there at the end of the composting process. You put that onto the soil and they're going to start making those little galleries in the soil and allow those vines to reconnect, because it's the vine root can only feed from the soil via the presence of microorganisms in that living system, not from a dead sack of dead nitrogen basically.
I think a lot of the talk early in the debate, as interesting as it was, about socio-economic factors and so forth, was sort of missing the point. So I'm delighted that we're now getting our hands dirty with soil health, microbes and so forth. This is to Richard. Everything I read on this topic seems to point to a global awareness that there is one unique feature of the vine compared to other crops. You can't leave a vineyard fallow. And this has implications, as I understand, that the sustained use of systemic chemicals over now probably 2 generations since the 1950s has left many soils, in the words of winemakers, like cadavers, dead bodies. Or the phrase that I think is more captures it is green concrete, is what winemakers are waking up to all over the world. And my understanding is that many of the people who are turning to biodynamics, particularly biodynamics, is in a response to finding their soils are dead, and they want to bring life back into their soils. Now, this is all the literature I read on the subject, and it seems that a lot of the comments you've made are sort of red herrings to this fact. What is your answer to the fact that 2 generations of agrochemical use on vineyards that can't be left fallow leaves soil dead?
I'm not sure what on earth you mean by not leaving vineyards fallow. Please explain.
You can't take the vines out, therefore the vineyard is farmed every year.
It's a perennial crop, I think.
It's a perennial crop, thank you, and therefore perhaps the use in 1 year of systemic chemicals, herbicides, pesticides, fungicides is not damaging, but it's the build-up, it's the accumulation over decades that causes the problems we see now in our vineyards globally. And biodynamics is simply a practical farming response to that.
I'm still confused with your term fallow. I gotta confess, if a fallow crop is when if you got wheat, and you have fallow, you don't have wheat. What are you suggesting? We don't farm the vineyard for a year? We don't prune it? We don't spray it? I don't know what you mean. Anyway, let me counter your assertion, and this is a common and I would say a motive assertion, that because of use of agrochemicals, the vineyards are dependent on the use of more agrochemicals. That is demonstrably a nonsense. And if you knew anything about pests and diseases, their biology, you would not suggest it. That is not the case. That is a nonsense. And for any of you in the audience who take medication, and you think you might not keep taking medication because you might get more sick. I mean, I don't know what to say.
And the point of green concrete, dead soils.
Oh, and you also inferred that winemakers, the font of all wisdom. I have a very particular problem with that as a viticulturist. It's also a nonsense. Green concrete. My God, what is a living soil and what is a dead soil? I mean, these are emotive terms.
They're not emotive at all.
They're
They're
demonstrable.
factual.
Good, we're getting some debate last night. Give me then, madam, a definition of a dead soil and
Okay.
an alive soil.
I have a garden, and if I go out, take my digging fork, stick it into the soil, and I turn it around, I can see millipedes, I can see worms, the soil is alive. I've worked in a biodynamic vineyard. The entire vineyard was alive. This actually was in New Zealand at Felton Road. We had tiny spiders, we had earwigs, we had ladybirds. You were covered in tiny spider webs every day. I went to other vineyards and looked at them. They seemed sterile in comparison.
Okay, so, and you're saying that a
And it's not that this is just my personal experience, but there are also studies which actually have, there are studies which prove that there is more microbial life where mycorrhizal fungi are concerned, where sort of other, I don't know what the bacteria are called, but exactly those bacteria that help break down organic matter. And if they're not there, or if the soil is waterlogged, or if there's no oxygen in the soil, they can't live. So dead soil would be a very compacted soil that is without microbial life, and which would therefore have problems producing organic matter or mineralizing organic matter so that it turns into nutrients.
Yeah, okay, what's your name, ma'am?
Anne.
Anne. And I understand what you're talking about. And there is no doubt there are many studies have shown that organic vineyards do have more organic matter. And from that point of view, I am a very strong supporter of organic viticulture.
But the point we made was not whether there are dead or alive soils. The point is that you said that it was an emotive statement.
It is
I
an
do not
emotive-
think it is an emotive statement
Oh,
at all. It is a statement of fact.
And excuse me, if there are soil microbiologists in this room, they would very much argue against the concept that a dead soil has no microbes. That is incorrect. Certainly I shouldn't point at you with my finger. The microflora in the soil will vary, largely depending on organic matter and protection, and from protection from the temperature of above. And for that reason, I agree with mulches. Okay?
But the point was less about microbial population, more about your point that these were emotive terms, which they are not.
Well, I've made my case. They are not terms that a soil microbiologist would use. I rest my case.
The question is organics and biodynamics, is it possible to produce wine in large volumes to cover the need of the world market? I know, Monty, that you think that wine is not a necessity because we can live without it, which is very true, but then we would have no jobs anymore. So just basically from a practical point of view, without wanting to take a stance against or pro any of the statements here, is it possible to cover that need? Or becomes wine so expensive that it becomes even more elitist?
Okay, thank you. And your name, just
Walter
for the
Speller.
microphone.
Walter.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I mean, at the moment, and ever since I've joined the wine trade, we've had a wine surplus. We're producing too much wine, and I think, if I've understood Richard, part of that I think is to do with excess irrigation. Australia's a classic example, and excess use of fertiliser, which basically make the soil redundant. Yes, organics can work on biodynamics can work on a small scale, 1 hectare vineyard. It can work on a 1,000 hectare vineyard, but it's only going to work well. And as Richard said, in terms of having the right nutrients in your soil that are available to the vine, including the nitrogen, if you have got the livestock on your farm to do that. to compost, etc., to compost all the waste all the crap that you produce in the winery every year. So it's very easy, as I said, just to buy a toy. It's easy for an organic guy. The difference between organic and biodynamic is in organics you can call up and get some fertilizer in. In biodynamics you can do that, but you're not supposed to. You're supposed actually to generate everything you need on your farm. So yes, and I would argue actually that the only way that our wine consumption patterns are going to become sustainable, in the sense that we don't overproduce by just slinging on a bunch of dead stuff, emotive word, onto the vineyard, but actually sling on some living stuff that's actually going to rein those vines and produce lower yields, where we have a sustainable industry both at the grassroots, the production side, and also the consumption side, is by making more of our vineyards more farm-like. I think the two go hand in hand.